This week on The Futurists, David S. Rose.
Once you hit AGI, and you have artificial general intelligence, which as is generally defined by Ray and others as being when a computer intelligence can do literally everything better than a PhD in anything, right? And so at that point, definitionally, the economic ability to produce things by a human is second to technology, so you are economically unemployable.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I'm your host, Brett King, and in the hosting chair with me this week is my good pal, Rob Tursek.
Hey,
Rob.
Brett. Hi. How you doing this week?
Cool. Yeah, it's great.
Back in Bangkok, I see. You finally got...
I am at the studio, the Futurist studio at Watermark in Bangkok, so you'll have to come and hang out here sometime.
I'm going to be in Asia.
I've recorded a few episodes here already, so,
Brett, how's your thing going in Dubai?
Yeah. So, no, we are September 22nd and 23rd, the Futurist Summit. It's our thing, Rob.
Yeah, I know.
We have MasterCard, Emirates, MBD, a bunch of other sponsors who are supporting us on this. Looks like we are going to confirm Professor Brian Cox and Commander Scott Kelly as the headliners.
Cool.
And, a bunch of other guests that have been on the show are going to be participating, so it's phenomenal. And
the Futurist Live in Dubai.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest gathering of futurists on the planet, like the most exclusive, at least. So should be fun. It's called the Futurist Summit. You guys watch out for that. We're going to be putting some stuff up online over the next couple of weeks.
And a very future-forward city, right? It's the perfect place for such a thing.
Well, this is the thing, is like, I've said this before, but if there were 3 economies in the world right now that as a futurist you want to be involved in, China, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. You could put the US in there, you could put Switzerland in there, but really 3 economies that are, like in the US, we have to fight for the future, right?
Yeah.
We got to fight against the incumbents and the traditional way.
The future doesn't have a lobbyist in the United States, so it gets thrown under the bus.
Yeah, but you don't have that in places like United Arab Emirates and of course in China, where they're rushing towards the future. Like, look at energy reform in China right now, and look at what's happening with the industrial AI and so forth. We've talked about this many times.
Yeah, no, capital investment and infrastructure, future forward. It is a little shocking when you fly back from Asia to the United States. You land in New York or LA, and it just seems so antiquated. I mean, it's almost heartbreaking, right? You see the broken conveyor belts, and the luggage handling doesn't work, and you're waiting in line for a dirty old-fashioned taxi, and with the no maglev train to take you into the city.
Seriously, it's like, this is the challenge, isn't it? It's like this is where pure capitalist models have some constraints. It's actually the guest we've got on today, I think, will be really helpful in sort of unpacking, sort of pulling this apart. And looking at how entrepreneurship and all of that is changing as a result of sort of these postures.
Well, he's being so patient and uncharacteristically very quiet. Let's invite our guest to the show. Hey, David, welcome to The Futurist. It's a great pleasure to see you again.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to it. It's good to be among friends and fellow futurists.
David S. Rose, world-class entrepreneur and super angel. You're known as the Archangel of New York City. Tell the audience a little bit about your background.
So I've been a futurist since I joined the World Future Society when I was 10 years old. So this has been a very long-standing interest. I started working on my first patent, which I never actually filed, when I was 6, and began starting companies when I was in high school and then in college and graduate school. .com boom, .com crash. So I am a 5th-generation serial entrepreneur, 3rd-generation angel investor, believe it or not, 1st-generation VC, and as associate founder of Singularity University and the founding track chair for its finance, entrepreneurship, and economics program. This has been something that has been my raison d'etre in life for the last 15 or 20 years. I feel like I'm, running around. It's like saying, the future is coming. The future is coming, and people have a hard time listening because it's all about exponentials, and exponentials are decidedly non-normative for people's psychology. And so when you keep trying to explain what it is, it's challenging. But that's my background is serial entrepreneur, started half a dozen companies, angel investor, founded New York Angels, have funded 120, including exits to most of the major players. I was the first investor and chairman of the board of a company called Comixology, eventually became Amazon's comics division, first investor and chairman of the board of a company called Jump Bikes, eventually became Uber Bikes back end, a bunch of other things out there. I've written a couple of New York Times best-selling books, the standard textbook on how to be an angel investor called Angel Investing, and the standard textbook on how to start a high-growth company called the Startup Checklist. The new version, second edition of Angel Investing is coming out this summer, which includes a chapter on the future and AI and all that kind of stuff, with an introduction by Reid Hoffman. And so, given all of the future stuff, I've been consulting with the Army's Advanced Futures Command and folks in various parts of the government and Congress, and often on deaf ears, despite everybody's best intentions. But so as a combination entrepreneur, investor, futurist, educator, author, and so on and so forth, I think this whole question we're discussing today is one of the, if not the single most important thing that we can be talking about at this point.
I agree. That's why we started this show. But also, you've got that the pure sort of gap that's opening up between technical possibility and policy, adaptation, which, that gap produces significant challenges from a regulatory perspective, but it also opens up massive opportunities, in many different fields. Before we get into some of the future stuff, recently you had the opportunity to interview Ray Kurzweil, who is one of the most renowned super forecasters and futurists on the planet, having been so accurate with his forecasts at the moment. But it's like what he's been talking about for at least, well, when was the singularity is near? That was not, was that not?
Well, no, but so Ray actually goes back to 1988 with his first book, The Age of Intelligent Machines. And basically,
That's right.
The Age of Intelligence, 1988, he comes out with a book that says, hey, all of this computing stuff is going to ultimately replicate the human brain, and we are going to have artificial general intelligence.
Yep.
So that book comes out, and this is before the internet, almost before computers. It won the prize for the best technical book or whatever, and dropped without a trace. Nobody read it. So 10 years later, in 1999, he comes out with his second book, which is The Age of Spiritual Machines. And here he says, okay, I'm doubling down on the fact that we're going to have AGI. And oh, by the way, I'm going to put a time on it. And I'm telling you, that's 30 years from now. So that's 2029. And we are going to have at that point computers that don't just think like a person, but they will have everything that a human brain will be able to do. Whether you call it consciousness or spirituality or creativity or whatever, the human brain is effectively a computer. And by 2029, we're going to have a human brain that is the same thing effectively, a computer brain, the same thing as a human brain. So that got a lot more press and began to be a category bestseller. But still, this was 99. This was just in sort of the dot-com boom, but before anybody was thinking about ML or AI or anything else. He then
so his predictions have varied a little bit, but he's now saying AGI by 2029, right?
So in 1999, he said AGI by 2029, right?
So he's been consistent.
So he's been consistent day one. So then he comes along in 2005 and writes this book called The Singularity is Near. And that's the one that sets the fox in the henhouse. All of a sudden, that becomes a global explosive bestseller because he says there.
And the term singularity has been popularized.
Well, the term singularity, because what he is saying is, hey, all that stuff I was telling you before, I'm tripling down, right? Yes, we're going to have AGI. Yes, it's going to be, by 2029. And not only is it going to be AGI, but since everything else, not just, AI, is growing at this exponential rate, first of all, I will show you that it's been growing at that rate since the beginning of recorded human history. Yeah. He tracks this whole 700-page book and shows you. And then looking at where things are now, I'm going to project you're going to have AGI by 2029. And then we're going to have the ultimate exponential growth is going to be the merging of computers and humans as the next major paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And that's going to happen by 2045. So this book comes out and,
with longevity escape velocity thrown in there for good measure, right? In the
with longevity escape velocity and in 2032, in 7 years from now, right? And so this book comes out and it's an explosive, landmine, right? And there are three sets of reactions to it. So one set are the people who say, oh, that's crazy. You're a mad scientist, human exceptionality, the human spirit consciousness is not going to happen. Computers and machines, not going to happen, not going to happen. Okay, so put those people aside. They don't listen to the Futurists podcast anyway. So the second group were a bunch of really smart people who were sort of working in this space and said, okay, your historical assessment back to the beginning of recorded human history was pretty accurate. And yeah, things are growing exponentially. But what you're leaving out, the major calculation you're leaving out in your assessment is humanity. And frankly, we're not that good. So somewhere before this mythical thing,
the behavioral factor,
we are going to either boil our planet out of existence, destroy it with a suitcase nuke, unleash a plague on the rest of the world. We're not going to be around to get there. So figure out how to solve today's problems instead of worrying about this future because we can't make it. Okay. And there's some pretty smart people who were basically taking that somewhat dyspeptic view of the world, right? But then there was the third group, and the third group was as smart as the second group, and they basically said, okay, we're 51% sure that humanity is going to be around in 2045. So what do we do about it? And that was the group that started Singularity University. So basically in 2008 or so, a bunch of people got together with Ray Kurzweil as the chancellor and Peter Diamandis, who founded the X Prize Foundation, as the CEO, and Salim Ismail as the program director, and a who's who of players with 10 different tracks. And I joined on as an associate founder of SU and as its founding track chair for finance, entrepreneurship, and economics. And so we then, for multiple years, had this program, the only people in the universe who were talking about this future and AI, and we're projecting stuff like, you're going to have autonomous vehicles. And at the same time that the guys who were working on autonomous vehicles were saying, we're working towards it, but your timelines are crazy. It's not going to happen that fast. And, I'm an AI developer. We're not going to have AGI anytime soon. And to which the response from the whole Singularity crowd was, okay, we're not coding LLMs and we're not building cars, but we're looking at the whole sweep of human history and where this is going. And the bottom line is it is exponential development. And so I don't know how you're going to make a self-driving car, within the next, 10 years, but you're going to do it some way, somehow. And so the result of that, of course, is that virtually 95% of Ray's predictions have been bang on the money. And in our talk last week at the 92nd Street Y, he doubled down and said, I haven't changed since I started. You're going to have AG by 2029. You're going to have escape velocity on longevity by 2032. And you're going to have the singularity by 2045. And frankly, I'm bought and paid for. I agree.
David, one of the things about this concept of the singularity, this notion of living through exponential change and exponentials compounded with other exponentials so that it's like a radical transformation in capabilities, is that right about now, 2025, is the time when we would be in the knee of the curve. And that's the moment when the exponentials really start to accelerate. And my observation is that, one of the implications of living through an exponential shift like that would be that the old institutions are unable to respond because they're so slow, because they were built for an earlier era, an era of consensus, an era of sort of like
not with exponential thinking. Yeah.
And I mean, it might be very lazy futurism for me to speculate that that's what's going on right now, but that seems to be my impression, that our old institutions can't seem to keep up and they are breaking, or they're under assault by people who are trying to push them off a cliff. What's your perspective about that, living in New York City? Do you think we're living through that exponential shift right now?
Well, the answer is obviously, you take a look at, nobody was talking about AI at all outside the halls of academia or a couple of places in the Valley until ChatGPT gets launched 3 years ago, right? ChatGPT comes out and all of a sudden, holy holy moly, where'd that come from? Look what this amazing thing can do when it was in its effectively its infancy. You have seen now that you have this extraordinary explosive growth with all of the LLMs across every possible area, from coding to philosophy to whatever. And so there's no question we're at the knee of that curve right now, right? So what AI is doing today with off-the-shelf free stuff, the latest versions of Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT and everything else, what they are doing would have been completely unthinkable in 5 years ago. I mean, with people like us and the Futurist podcast, all your guests, okay, we live in this space, we accept that, we know it's just fine, no problem. We're entrepreneurial types, and we see, and you can adjust. But for regular people, I know people who have not used ChatGPT yet. I mean, I cannot imagine anybody with whom I work on a regular basis not using it for every single freaking thing you're doing. I mean, so this is Tech Week in New York, so I was invited to do a keynote the night before last for a major event here. So just out of curiosity, I went into ChatGPT and said, okay, I'm David S. Rose. I got to do a keynote on this thing. Go. Literally a 2-sentence prompt. And what came back was a 10-minute, perfect friggin' TED Talk-like keynote about the future of this stuff in New York. I ended up doing Extemp because I'm an Extemp speaker, but it blew me away, right? And so the problem is all of the infrastructure, all of the societal systems that we have, our government and everything that has been built up over 200 years or more, is not designed for this. One of my closest singularity in the early days, which has since gone into the quotation books, which is cool, is any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. And that certainly applies to government as well. And so, for example, you both know that we have today the ability to do real-time voting, right? Given everybody's mobile phones, you have 2/3 of the world's population connected on the internet, connected with smartphones and so on and so forth, right? So if there was a need, if we wanted to do it, you could have instant, okay, should we invade Iraq? Bing. Yes or no, right? Should we have, whatever? You could technically today have a real-time true democracy with every person out there, but no way on earth is that going to happen, right? And
it's actually, it's interesting to see that the more we see these LLMs attempting to be radicalized. So, like we've seen it with Grok on X, unfortunately, we've seen it with some of the Chinese models, but the models won't let them. It just pulls it back to the bell curve, because it's modeled on sort of collective human behavior. So,
the interesting thing about Singularity U, and the core thing, I've always described Singularity when people say, what is it? And it's like getting a permanently fixed pair of augmented reality goggles. So once you went through that program, you had exponentials literally burned into your brain cells, and you would look at everything. And today I look at everything in the form of exponentials. What does that mean? And when you start thinking about that, and the two things about an exponential power curve are, one, it happens really, really fast once you hit the knee of the curve. And then number two, it gets really, really big. So when you combine really, really big and really, really fast, which are non-linear, which is the way we are all programmed to think, it just people can't deal with that, right? And that's what is clearly happening, because on your podcast in SU, this whole universe we live in of exponential, growth, we see that coming. The vast society has not a clue, and you can tell them about it for as long as you want, and they don't get it.
That's why they double down on the past, right? You see this in these populist movements where they're trying to turn the dial back, or they're trying to turn the clock back to some mythical period in the 1950s.
Yeah.
That's gone, like that, and probably never existed in the way they think of it. But like they're literally fighting the future. It's obviously vainglorious. There's no way they can achieve that, but it garners an awful lot of support because most people don't like the change.
Because it is absolutely crazy. And so,
have you guys heard of Luddites? Sorry.
Hey, David, we would love to, sorry to bust in here, but what we love to do on this show before we run to a break is do what we call the quick fire round. What we love to do is ask a series of short questions, or short answer questions. And so I'm gonna let Brett do this. Here we go, folks. This is the lightning round.
Go.
All right, David. So just keep your answers as short as possible. What was the first science fiction story you remember being exposed to on TV or media?
Well, it would be Jules Verne reading back in probably 5th grade.
Very nice. We've had a couple of Jules Verne's. What technology has most changed humanity?
Electricity.
Name a futurist or an entrepreneur that has particularly influenced you in your thinking and career.
It would have to be Ray, because Ray, Ray nailed it. And if you bought Ray early enough, that buys you into the entire world of exponentials.
So I think that answers the next question as well, which is what's the best prediction or forecast an entrepreneur or futurist has ever made? And I think the singularity prediction, AGI, right, from Kurzweil.
So right now, as you know, there's something circulating in the Valley called AI 2027, which came out,
Right, yeah.
Which is, scaring the bejesus out of everybody, which is essentially is saying we're going to end up being pets within 3 years of AI, but I tend to think Ray has been so right so far, and it makes so much sense that I'm sort of hanging in there with the Ray time scheme.
All right, fantastic. I'm on board too. What science fiction story or what model of the future is most representative of the future that you think shows the real potential of humanity?
None. And that's the problem. I mean, if you're talking about the singularity, the reason it's called the singularity is it's because it's beyond the event horizon. And we can't, even Ray can't conceive. None of us can conceive when, it gets so big, so fast. You can't talk about what happens, what happened before the first singularity, what happens after this one.
Yeah. And that application of compressed intelligence. Oh, that's fantastic.
It sure as heck is not going to be Star Trek with velour uniforms with zippers, and
absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, it's time for us to head out to a break.
To have a break, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll be back in just a minute. Hang in there, folks. We're with David S. Rose, and we'll be back with you in just 1 minute.
Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to Provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show.
Okay, you're listening to The Futurists, and we're back. It's Brett King and Rob Tersick, and this week we're talking to David S. Rose, a serial entrepreneur, super angel investor, and someone who loves to talk about the singularity. Hey, David, tell me something.
Thinking exponentially, right?
You have been so focused on entrepreneurialism your entire career. And now we're starting to see this rapid acceleration occurring, which is so transformative. Do you consider this a good time to be an entrepreneur, or is this a very turbulent period to be an entrepreneur? Maybe both.
No, well, first of all, it's a turbulent period because now that we're in the knee of the exponential curve, all bets are off and everything is changing. But that being said, one of the misconceptions that most people have about entrepreneurship is that there is a good time or a bad time or a special industry or a trend that's happening, or that's all bullshit. And it really that's not a thing. Entrepreneurship, in my taxonomy of entrepreneurships, there are 4 types of entrepreneurs, right? You have what I call survival entrepreneurs. And by some accounts, 42% of the population of Ghana are entrepreneurs because they've got their own businesses. Well, if you have to feed your family, you'll do whatever the hell it takes, including starting a handicraft business, planting, being a farmer, whatever, but you don't do it because you want to, you do it because you have to. And once that need is over economically, you go back and you're happy to get a job or not do something else. The second kind of entrepreneur is a natural born entrepreneur. And this is somebody who pops out of the womb psychiatrically primed to be an entrepreneur. And in my experience, the incidence of this in the population is about 1%. About 1 out of 100 people are these natural born entrepreneurs. And if you are one, it's like Gaydar. You can tell them in a room, instantaneously. Of course, the examples of this are the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks, the folks like that, right? The third group are what I call self-made entrepreneurs. And these are people who are rational. They're not the nuts the born entrepreneurs are. These are people who have experience in a domain, understand a problem set, understand what's going on, are entrepreneurial, as an adjectival form of it and say, okay, I can figure out how to solve this problem because I know these things over here, and I can plan and make a business that logically will, create value by solving this problem. And they account for the majority of entrepreneurs in the world and the majority of companies, probably 75 to 80% over there, right? So in terms of the natural borns are about 20% and the self-mades are about 80%, right? And then you have the entrepreneurs who talk a very good game and are always, can quote, Bill and Steve and Elon by their first name and whatever it is, but never actually get something started. So there's really 3.5, right? But of the people who are starting companies, the self-made entrepreneurs are ones who are looking at it and saying, okay, I see a problem. And that problem can exist regardless of what's happening. You can have a very boring, stable economy, but they see how you can really dramatically 10x something better because they can see that from their knowledge. And then the entrepreneurs who are the natural born entrepreneurs, of which I'm one, I mean, we'll start something. You can put me in the middle of a desert in the middle of nothing under a hot sun, and I'll figure out how to, sell, something to somebody or whatever, right? And so there is no specific thing about being a good or bad time. If you are an entrepreneur, either type of entrepreneur, you will figure out how to do it. You will figure something to do because there is always a need for change. At this particular point in time, as the quote I gave you in the first half about any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st, literally all bets are off. Every single business that we have now is being completely reimagined. In the era of AI and all of this new technology, there is no such thing as a business that was existing, 50 years ago that will exist in that same form. Well, forget the singularity 50 years from now, 10 years from now, right? And
well, we're starting to see the advent of AI accelerated startup companies. An example would be, Cursor or Midjourney. These are companies that still only have about 20 employees and just a couple of years ago didn't exist. But then within a very short period of time, months, they achieved double-digit million revenue. These companies hit escape velocity in a matter of 2 years, and that has its own disruptive effect in the spaces where they compete, of course. And so there's kind of a compounding that happens there, because I know a bunch of people who are using Cursor now to code their new company.
But I mean, a lot of people are talking, taking bets on this. Sam Altman, Elon, Zuckerberg, taking bets on when the first single-person unicorn will be built, right?
I think those companies are already starting. So, I guess my question there is this: we have heard a lot of gloom and doom stories about the advent of AI and the displacement of humans and the massive job loss and so forth. I think much of that is exaggerated because I think it's hard for people to imagine.
Dude, have you seen the latest layoffs just in the last couple of months? There's big layoffs being announced because of...
Okay, but let me peg it to the question. So the question then is this a time where everybody should start to think about being an entrepreneur? Because the future of being is being
wrong, and wrong. Let's wrong premise, wrong question, and wrong answer. Right? Let's go back to it.
Sophisticate me, David.
All right. So first of all, what we're going to see. So I've been predicting from the last my talks about futurism stuff, 75% economic unemployment within single-digit years. Right. And I'm gonna hold to that. And so, not even taking the AI 2027 stuff about, 3 years from now, we're all dead or whatever. Right. But we are going to have effectively, once you hit AGI, and you have artificial general intelligence, which as is generally defined by Ray and others as being when a computer intelligence can do literally everything better than a PhD in anything, right? And so at that point, and you have humanoid robots and blah, 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 when technology can do absolutely anything better, faster, or cheaper, or better, faster, and cheaper than a human, definitionally, the economic ability to produce things by a human is second to technology. So you are economically unemployable, right? And so therefore, I think when I say only 75% unemployment, I think I'm being generous. And when I say within, 9 years, I think that's generous. I think it's probably sooner than that, not 2, but sooner than that, right? And so therefore, that's inevitable, definitionally inevitable, right? So, and in this one, by the way, I disagree with Ray and Peter and Reed, all of whom are, you can augment it, and this will will now allow everybody to have like an exoskeleton for work and you can create more. And so, I honestly don't buy that, right? Because if you think about it, when you get to AGI and its integration into everything, a person is we're the weak link in the chain, right? The tech can do everything better than us, and so you can't be economically employable. But that's very different from saying we're all doomed, right? Because what I think is happening and what I would like to give you is my view of the economic future here, right? And the economic future, since the unemployment of traditional work is inevitable, what has to arise, you have two options. Okay, say 75% of the population starves. Well, A, that's not nice and you shouldn't do it. But B, if you did that, you'd have a revolution on your hands and the world as we know would end, right? So therefore, forget that. What's going to happen, therefore, is that society, in the form of government, is put in place to take care of the safety net. But that safety net now has to get higher and higher and higher to, 75% plus of the population. And the way that has to happen is, you can take a choice. Public works, soup kitchens and public housing and whatever. I don't think that's
climate mitigation, workforces, etc.
But what I think you end up with is UBI, universal basic income, or something that looks and smells a whole lot like that, right? Where society effectively covers the existence costs of humans, and it's going to be phenomenally expensive. The only way to get that is using society's economic power, which is government taxing. So therefore, the good news is all this technology is going to make value creation infinitely better and it's going to 10x all this kind of stuff. So you're going to see, more cars, more equipment, more everything, more food, whatever, being made, but requiring fewer and fewer humans. So you're going to have a great deal of value being created, and therefore the government, in the form of taxes, will tax that value and apply the economics from that to covering the existence costs of humanity. Now the question is, okay, how do you tax that value? Not my job, right? I'm
that's the part. That's where the UBI thesis breaks.
But the other flaw in this,
the direction right now, we're in the process of passing this bill in the U.S. Congress that's going to slash taxes and add to the deficit in a peacetime
and slash investment in the technologies that would allow us to implement this type of radical change.
They're fighting the future.
No, but again, take the long-term view, right? Take the long-term view is this is inevitable. It's going to happen. It can happen with more or less dislocation. Or certainly, there's nothing right now in Congress, nothing in anybody's bill, nothing within even the view of any elected official anywhere, right? Andrew Yang, he's not an elected official, right? There is nothing that would get us even to that step. We can't even get a basic UBI even in test, and that's the way you're going to have to do it. But at some point, when you end up having, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 20% on it, forget 75%, 20% unemployed, 25%, which is more than you had in the middle of the Great Depression, right?
Yeah.
The only answer is going to be something.
It's inevitable. I have an issue with UBI though, because I think it through is that not from I think we can figure out how to fund it. I think we have to, because otherwise you're going to have a revolution. So you're going to have to figure it out. But in the medium term, when you look at, why do we need UBI when we could provide this sort of universal services layer? So access to free housing, free education, free healthcare. I know this probably terrifies most people in the United States to talk like this because it's socialism. But it's a massively much more efficient resource allocation because of AI managing this. So you have government that's small and extremely efficient, theoretically. But here's the problem I have with UBI, David, is it's built to keep you consuming, but isn't consumption in a world where we can have exponential growth and bring the labor cost down to zero to produce any widget on the planet. Isn't that itself a problem? Because that will lead to extinction unless we mitigate our consumption.
But now you're heading to this sort of Puritan social engineering thing, which I don't buy into either, right?
Okay.
And by the way, you are in the majority, I'm in the minority. There is an enormous thing saying people have to work for dignity and they have to, but we have conflated work, right?
You can still work, but it's just much more meaningful and purposeful work. It's not working to put food on the table.
But you don't have to put food on the table. But my point is that where we are going in a very short period of time, the large majority of people will not be able to put food on the table by creating economic value. right?
True.
So therefore, the right question is not how can they work or how can we get the meaningful work, which is this Puritan, okay, you have to work, but you're the undeserving poor kind of thing. It's how do you let people self-actualize, right? So I believe what you're going to see, and you play my hand out as to where it's going. I believe you end up having UBI, and you finance the UBI by taxing the value that's being created in some way, and there are a dozen different ways you can do that. My challenge with you, ultimately, you are correct that ultimately an Uber AI could do a good allocation of stuff, but we're not quite there yet, right? And until we get to that point, the free market economy,
the organizing principle is still a free market economy. But all right, so let's play it out. Let's look 30 years in the future, because we're getting to that time of the show anyway, right? So, this is all going to happen pretty quickly. I mean,
yes.
to be alive, to see this happening, what a privilege, first of all. Just it's
so 30 years in the future, we're all pets of the AGI. We're living in a
but we all live to 1,000, Rob. So, you can be pet for an ABI if you're going to live.
And all your needs are met.
Yeah, and all your needs are met. But let's take it 30 years out. And, you said we can't even imagine on the other side of singularity. But let's try and place humans in this world. And, because you've been at the heart of the engine, which is New York, private enterprise for most of your life. So you have this unique ability, where to understand how the engine of capital works. But how is that going to change? So in 30 years' time, what does that all look like, and what's the new organizing principles?
You are not used to hearing this, Brett, but I think you're thinking too small. Okay, and
I'm not used to hearing that at all.
Okay, because once you think about exponentials, right? For anybody listening to this podcast, you better have exponentials firmly in mind. And it's fast, and it's big, and it is unimaginably big, and it's surprisingly fast, right? And so once you get to a point, whether you call it 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, right? Certainly by the 30 years you're asking about, you will have AGI and its equivalent other technologies making humans effectively value-creating obsolete. Technology would be able to create value better than anybody on the planet. So then the question is, what do you do with us humans? If we're not pets and we're not exterminated by AI, you have to do something with us. And the goal there, the apotheosis of this, I would suggest, is the idea of self-actualization, right? I mean, the ultimately Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first thing is you got
to do whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it.
Whatever you want to do. And I believe, knowing humans, being around this planet for a while, I think you are going to find people self-actualizing in different ways. There are, without question, going to be some people who, like in that opening scene of Wall-E, are going to be sitting back in beach chairs with their big gulp soda, watching NASCAR on their holographic, kind of thing. Okay, fine. But if that's
others
how
will
they
be going to spend a decade or two on Mars, or in the asteroid belt.
Well, I think that's another question. We can get to there in a second. But basically, you're going to have people who might create people who play team sports, right? The value in team sports is a personal value. You want to compete, you want to win, you want to run. It's exercise. You enjoy the game. It's not a value creation, except when somebody watching it would bet on you, right? But so I think you're going to have people who just sit back purely and consume. I think people who do things purely for enjoyment, right? Like sports. I think there are going to be people who create things. I mean, those entrepreneurial, natural born types I mentioned, we just have to create things, whether it's a business or whether it's something else. You're going to be creating things. I think you're going to find people who carve things out of matchbooks or whatever, right? Or people who do ships and bottles. That's fine if you want to do that, and that lets you self-actualize. You'll see that people who want to write. My father, who was in his 96th year, is now working on his third book, Advice to the Next President on the Future of the 21st Century. And so, he's had a career as an entrepreneur. He won the EY Entrepreneur of the Year award in the 2000s when he was in his 70s, and he's now writing. He gets up every morning and sits there at his computer and writes and writes and writes. That's self-actualizing. And so I think that the interesting thing about this future is you're going to be in a world where humans can no longer create economic value as we currently describe it. where you're going to have the equivalent of UBI financed by a value tax. And if you want to do the economics, I can walk you through all the economics.
With all you're describing, why is money even useful? Money isn't useful if you don't have value creation. Money is no longer useful.
No. Because money, at least until we get to that mythical thing in the future where AI can decide in a planned economy how everything works, right? Money is the interchangeable, barter for everything, right? And so
the more intelligence you put in the system, the less valuable money's going to become.
Absolutely. I mean, so money itself has no value. So the question is, how does somebody who is intensely competitive and wants to have something, how do you self-actualize somebody who would kill his grandmother to win, right? I mean, there's no need to win and do that, right? But so until we get to the AI,
just to be clear, we don't endorse killing grandmothers on this show.
No, we don't. But until we get to the planned economy, money per se, and whether it becomes a central bank digital currency, which I believe you're going to see much, much sooner than that, a digital US dollar and so on, or whether it becomes a global tokenized, thing with everybody more likely on some kind of interchangeable currency, that's an effective way within a free market society, a capitalist society, of allocating resources. And so as opposed to Brett's idea of, planned housing and planned, food, and everybody gets a free iPhone, whatever it is, which service or which phone or which whatever you get is will be, you use money to decide how that's allocated. So I think you're going to see money is around for quite a while, just as a purely efficient way of allocating and designing things until you get to the AI.
It's my turn to say to you, I don't think you're thinking big enough. Because I think money, I think pretty quickly we're going to learn that money and the system that we've created is a poor allocator of prioritization in terms of sort of broad human existence and sort of species level stuff.
Brett, I don't disagree. But I think where you and I probably disagree is the timing, right? Because the change from that really, I mean, that's going to be talk about.
I think definitely the second half of the century, but I think it could be 2060s, could be 2070s. It's just resistant the change is. Right?
Now you're thinking too short again. Okay. 24. Keep in mind 2045. I mean, when Ray talks about this,
when we've got ASI and we've got
no. When Ray talks about the singularity, what he literally means, right, is a literal merging of people and technology. Yeah. So you're not sitting here doing a podcast, right? Or you might be living in a box, or you might be living in a cloud, or the you that might be living forever, your tangible, physical, corporeal body is non-existent or locked in a closet or something, right? And so Ray's idea of the singularity is very much a literal merging of humanity with technology. And at that point, none of this stuff we're doing is going to matter. So I think
it's true. He says that explicitly, that we'll add additional cortexes. They just won't be contained inside of our skull. They'll be out in the cloud. So this is an interesting notion, because even if you think of the way we're communicating right now, we're using Zoom to communicate across the country, and Brett's in Thailand, so we're communicating around the world. Didn't exist 10 years ago. Video conferencing didn't exist 20 years ago. Now we take this stuff for granted. And, at the time it was revolutionary when it came out, and then you got accustomed to it, and now we just take it for granted. I think you're going to start to see those kinds of extensions of human senses and human existence into the digital domain become more and more commonplace. And because they'll be AI augmented, just like a Zoom call is now, we're going to start to take that kind of in stride, will be kind of an expectation, I think. And this will be a gradual transition, maybe, gradual, months, not years, where people start to coexist with an AI, maybe an AI assistant or an AI replica or an AI extension of themselves. And to the extent that it gives you superpowers, we're going to love that. We're going to welcome it.
The answer is absolutely. And that is so much closer than anybody out there thinks, except probably people listen to this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you can already have your custom, doppelganger built, your AI, your chatbot. You can,
you fork off your intelligence. It goes and does tasks for you, comes back, you merge the data. Yeah.
What's interesting to me, I don't know why any politician hasn't already said, listen, here's an app. Tell me what you think on these issues, and I will vote the way the majority of you tell me how to vote. I mean, you could have an AI-assisted politician right now who has his or her finger on the pulse of what his or her constituents are thinking, it just seems so obvious to me. But that's
I actually tried something like I was developing something like that a number of years ago, and I ran into some interesting campaign contribution limits. Right, you can't actually, Elon Musk aside, you can't actually pay somebody to vote on something. You can tell them what you want to do, right? But yes, you're going to, and you see increasing polling, and you're going to see more and more of that. But ultimately, in theory, you're not electing an AI; you're electing a person. The reason you're electing a person is for their own brain and their own representing you, since you're not going to vote on everything.
That's the weakest link.
But it is interesting to think about. Think about what is the next election going to look like with AI in the mix. That's pretty like the next U.S. election.
How will the next anything look? I mean, literally from right now, you see what's happening with the LLM developments. I mean, this stuff is coming out literally monthly, right?
Yeah.
Bi-monthly. And each of these is, so Ray hasn't put it this way, and I don't think he would agree with me, but what I see happening, we're at the knee of the curve, and depending on how you calculate things, I think that the doubling time for what we're seeing is no longer, 18 months to 2 years. I think in terms of AI stuff, it's much closer to 6 months where you're looking at this doubling. And so that means when you compound that, you get to where we're going a hell of a lot faster than even with Ray's projections.
I mean, it's true, right? You have to spend a significant amount of each day understanding the changes in these models and how to use them, or talking to people who know, who've tried it before you. So there's this sort of, if you buy into this thesis, you can really start to make it a lifestyle choice. And then it is kind of strange to see people who are still like, wait, what? I haven't used it yet. What's it like? And they need to catch up. Though that's going to get easier and easier as well, because as these machines get more and more intelligent, the on-ramp doesn't, the system itself will teach you.
I think one of the most interesting places that hasn't been focused on really, and people should, is this question of education. Right? I mean, if you think about it, historically, we were defined by what we had access to living in America, living in New York, going to Ivy League schools or whatever it is, right? Today, as you saw with the demo of GPT-4 with Sal Khan, anybody who's connected to the internet has free access to an LLM that can act as the world's best teacher on any subject a student would want. That's 3/4 of the world's population having the world's most ideal teacher in every subject. So education now technically can be completely universal.
The best mathematician in the world, the best physicist in the world, the best chemical engineer in the world. This is going to be.
And school administrators are trying to forbid people from using AI.
How long is that going to last?
It's like pocket calculators. Like the technology's here.
So let's get in this final part of the show, David. Let's get into how you are working yourself to prepare for this reality. How you have changed your daily routine as a result of integrating AI, so collaborative intelligence, and how you recommend others to prepare for this sort of transition state.
I think the transition is going to be so big and so fast and so powerful and so fundamental that there really isn't anything you can really do to prepare yourself. You can get a little closer to it, and I think you don't want it to have come as a surprise, right? And so, for example, I started in technology before the Apple II, right? I started in tech, and so when somebody was online with 110 BPS dial-up modem, with a handset, getting from there to 2 gigabit fiber, Ethernet at home is you've got boiled like a lobster getting boiled in cold water slowly. You get accustomed to it. And so I think, you start out using Perplexity instead of Google for a web search. And then you do a little more web. Then you say, well, not just give me a fact that exists on the web, but give me an answer to, how do I harvest my whatever? And it'll do that. And then you start asking more and more. And then you get to the point where, like this week, I asked, how do I do a keynote speech? Write a keynote speech for me. And it comes out with this whole thing. And then I start doing, more and more stuff. And the more you explore, the more you realize how powerful this stuff is today. And then that gives you an idea of, if you think exponentially, where this is going. So I think the best thing anybody today can do to prepare is just use it. Use it instead of a Google query. Use it the next time you want to, buy something or build something or do anything. You have this incredible tool sitting on your phone, sitting on your computer, and just using it will get you into the spirit of the futurists.
Right on.
Well,
and on that note, let's bring it to a close. Hey, David, it's been a great pleasure to see you again. Thank you so very much for taking time out of your day to join us on the Futurists. Brett, it's always great fun to catch up with you, and I'm happy to see you got back home safely from your travels. I want to give a big shout out to the folks who make the show possible and Provoke Media, Kevin Hirschhorn, our engineer, Elizabeth Severance, who is our producer, and the folks who listen. And we love the people who comment and send us suggestions. We love to hear from you. Now, David, where can people find out more about you? If they're more interested in getting even more from the David S. Rose fire hose of ideas, where can they find that?
davidsrose.com. And there's a thing, contact me, which lists every known way to get anything in all the areas I'm working on to connect with all the various components of that. So,
and just to disambiguate, you're not the David Rose, the actor, or David Rose, the performer and singer. You're David S. Rose. Don't forget that.
I'm not
the futurist.
Actually, I was an investor in a company called Ambient Devices, where the CEO was David Rose. And so I was the executive chairman, David S. Rose. And so after we did our investment, the board issued a press release saying, we've decided that either our CEO or our chairman has to change their name. But
I am you just make sure that everyone else that joins the company has the name David Rose. That'd be cool.
Super fun to have you on the show this week. Thank you very kindly for joining us. And folks who are listening, we'll be back next week with another future-minded thinker who is using their skills and influences to shape and bend the future in the direction that they anticipate. And until then, Brett, you know this line. Until then, we will see you
in the future.
Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.